On a gloomy autumn afternoon in 2008, at the historic Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia, a young woman named Sarah, whose name has been changed, stood silently before her mother's grave. It had been a year since her mother passed away, and the pain of loss was still deep in Sarah's heart. Oakland Cemetery is famous for its antique beauty and ghostly tales. Rows of old trees cast long shadows. Stone angel statues were covered in moss, and old tombstones with faded inscriptions created a scene that was both solemn and eerie. Sarah placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the tombstone, gently stroking the inscription of her mother's name. The autumn wind blew softly, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. The silence was so profound that Sarah could clearly hear her own heartbeat. She felt as if her mother was still somewhere nearby, watching over her. As Sarah was lost in memories of her mother, she suddenly heard a strange sound coming from behind a large tomb nearby. It was a very faint sound, like a branch breaking, but in the quiet of the cemetery, it became incredibly clear. Curious, Sarah turned her head to look. The tomb was tall, made of black granite, and had a statue of a woman kneeling in prayer on top. Sarah didn't see anyone there. She thought maybe it was just the wind or some animal. But just as Sarah turned back, she heard the sound again. This time clearer. It wasn't the sound of a branch breaking, but the sound of very light footsteps on gravel. Sarah felt a strange unease. She was sure she hadn't misheard. Sarah carefully looked around. The cemetery was much emptier now, with only a few people visiting graves in the distance. She didn't see anyone near that tomb. But the footsteps continued, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if someone was walking around the tomb. Sarah began to feel truly scared. She didn't know who or what was nearby. She tried to calm herself down, thinking maybe it was just a cemetery security guard. But why would they be walking so silently? Sarah decided she had to go see what was happening. She took a deep breath and slowly walked towards the large tomb. As she got closer, she scanned her surroundings, trying to find the source of the footsteps. Suddenly, Sarah saw something strange behind the tomb. It was a blurry figure lurking behind the statue. The figure was tall and gaunt, wearing dark clothing. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. She was sure it wasn't a security guard. Sarah stood silently, observing the blurry figure behind the tomb. The figure seemed to be trying to hide, only occasionally revealing a part of its body. Sarah felt a cold fear spread through her body. She didn't know who it was and why they were lurking in the cemetery so late in the afternoon. Sarah called out softly, "Is anyone there?" Her voice trembled, echoing in the quiet of the cemetery. No one answered. The figure behind the tomb remained silent, not moving at all. Sarah decided to get closer to see better. She carefully walked on the gravel path, trying not to make any noise. When she got near the tomb, she tiptoed around to the back. But as Sarah stepped behind the tomb, she was horrified to realize that no one was there. The statue of the kneeling woman stood silently on its pedestal, and there was no sign that anyone had just been there. Sarah felt confused and a little chilled. So what was the figure she had just seen? Maybe she had imagined it all. She tried to reassure herself, but the feeling of unease did not disappear. Sarah returned to her mother's grave, intending to light an incense stick and leave. But just as she bent down to take out her lighter from her purse, she heard footsteps again, this time clearer and closer. Sarah startled and looked up. She was horrified to see a figure standing right behind her mother's grave. The figure was tall, wearing a long black robe that covered it from head to toe. The person's face was obscured by a wide hood. Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run down her spine. She couldn't move, couldn't say a word. She could only stand there, staring in horror at the terrifying figure standing right behind her mother. The figure slowly raised an arm, its long, bony fingers pointing towards Sarah. Sarah felt a bone-chilling cold spread through her body. She had the feeling that she was being targeted by something very evil. Suddenly, the figure leaned down slightly, and Sarah was horrified to see a skeletal hand touching her mother's tombstone. Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. She couldn't let someone desecrate her mother's grave. With an angry shout, Sarah lunged towards the figure in black, but just as she reached it, the figure suddenly vanished into thin air, as if it had never been there. Sarah stood frozen, staring in astonishment at the empty space. She felt confused and scared. What was happening? Sarah turned back to her mother's grave. Everything was the same. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums still lay peacefully on the headstone. But Sarah felt a change. A cold and gloomy feeling enveloping the area. Suddenly, Sarah heard a very soft whisper right next to her ear. A hoarse and cold voice said, "You don't belong here." Sarah startled and spun around, but saw no one. She felt like someone had just breathed into her ear. Sarah tried to stay calm. She thought maybe she was too stressed and hallucinating. But the whisper came again, this time clearer. "Leave, now." Sarah felt utter terror. She knew she couldn't stay here any longer. Sarah hurriedly backed away, wanting to flee this terrifying place. But as she turned, she was horrified to see another figure standing in her way. This figure also wore a long black robe, but he was taller and more muscular than the previous one. His face was obscured by shadows, but Sarah could sense an aura of aggression and cruelty emanating from him. The man in black slowly walked towards Sarah, his heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel path, creating eerie sounds. Sarah tried to scream for help, but her throat constricted, and no sound came out. As the man got closer, Sarah saw something glinting in his hand. It was a shiny dagger. Sarah felt hopeless. She knew she couldn't fight him. Just then, Sarah suddenly heard a loud noise coming from behind her. It was the sound of a large stone being pushed over. Sarah turned to look and was horrified to see that the stone angel statue nearby had fallen over, breaking into many pieces. But more terrifyingly, Sarah saw a blurry figure standing right next to the broken statue. It was a woman wearing a long white dress, her face beautiful but pale and sad. Sarah recognized her as the statue from the large tomb earlier. The ghost of the woman slowly raised her hand, her pale white fingers pointing towards the man in black who was approaching Sarah. Sarah felt as if a strange protection was surrounding her. The ghost of the woman in the white dress lunged at the man in black with a heart-wrenching scream. The man startled and backed away, the dagger in his hand trembling. He seemed to sense the danger from the ghost as well. The ghost floated past Sarah, moving directly towards the man. She raised her hand, her cold fingers touching his face. The man groaned in pain, trying to swing his knife to attack back, but the ghost was too fast, easily dodging his attacks. The battle between the ghost and the man happened very quickly. The man in black seemed to have no chance against the supernatural power of the ghost. She wrestled him to the ground, and groans and growls echoed in the quiet of the cemetery. Sarah stood silently, watching in horror as the battle unfolded. She didn't understand why the ghost was protecting her, but she felt incredibly grateful. She realized that perhaps the spirit of this woman had also been a victim of something cruel. Finally, the ghost overpowered the man. She raised her hand high, and a blinding white light emanated from her fingers. The man in black screamed in terror, and his body began to tremble violently. Then, in an instant, the man in black completely vanished, leaving only his black robe lying on the ground. The ghost of the woman slowly turned to look at Sarah. Her face still held a trace of sadness, but her eyes were gentler. She smiled faintly at Sarah, a sad but grateful smile. Then she pointed towards Sarah's mother's grave, then looked up at the sky. Sarah understood. Perhaps her spirit was also seeking peace. Sarah nodded, understanding that she needed to help both spirits. She approached her mother's grave, lit an incense stick, and prayed for both her mother and the stranger woman to rest in peace. As Sarah was praying, she felt a gentle warm breeze pass through her. She opened her eyes and was astonished to see the ghost of the woman standing right beside her. She nodded slightly at Sarah, then slowly faded into the air. Sarah felt a strange peace spread through her heart. She knew she had just witnessed something extraordinary, and she had helped an unfortunate soul find release. After the ghost disappeared, Sarah felt a compelling curiosity. She wanted to know why the man in black had attacked her, and why the ghost of the woman had protected her. She decided to research the history of Oakland Cemetery. Sarah went to the cemetery's management office and asked about any strange stories that had occurred there. The manager, an old man named Robert, told Sarah about a dark legend. According to Robert, in the 19th century, a serial killer named Silas had buried his victims in this cemetery. Silas was a cruel and deranged man who enjoyed torturing and killing innocent people. People said that the spirits of his victims still lingered in the cemetery. Seeking revenge, Robert also told Sarah the story of Elizabeth, the woman whose statue was on the large tomb. Elizabeth was a beautiful and kind woman, but she had been kidnapped and murdered by Silas. People believed that Elizabeth's spirit remained in the cemetery to protect innocent people from evil forces. Sarah felt a chill when she heard these stories. She thought maybe the man in black she had seen was the spirit of Silas. He had returned to the cemetery to continue his evil deeds, and Elizabeth had appeared to stop him. But why had Silas targeted Sarah? She had never harmed anyone. Sarah thought and thought but couldn't find an answer. Sarah decided to visit Elizabeth's grave to express her gratitude. She went to the large tomb, placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the pedestal, and softly said, "Thank you for protecting me." Just as Sarah finished speaking, she suddenly heard a gentle voice in her head, "Be careful, he will return." Sarah startled and looked around, but saw no one. She knew it was Elizabeth's voice. Sarah felt a wave of anxiety rise within her. Elizabeth's warning made her feel uneasy. She knew she wasn't safe yet. After Elizabeth's warning, Sarah felt she needed to do something to protect herself and others from Silas's evil spirit. She decided to seek help from a priest. Sarah told the priest the entire story of what she had experienced in the cemetery. The priest was very surprised and worried. He said that Oakland Cemetery had a complex history and that there might be evil forces lurking there. The priest advised Sarah to pray and seek God's protection. He also offered to go to the cemetery with her to perform an exorcism, helping the trapped souls find release. One evening, Sarah and the priest returned to Oakland Cemetery. They went to Sarah's mother's grave and began to pray. The priest recited biblical verses and sprinkled holy water on the grave. While they were praying, a cold wind blew strongly through the cemetery. shaking the old trees. Sarah felt an evil presence nearby. Suddenly, the figure of the man in black reappeared, standing right behind Sarah's mother's grave. He stared intently at Sarah with hateful eyes. The priest continued to recite the prayer, his voice echoing in the quiet of the cemetery. The light from the crucifix in his hand seemed to shine on the figure in black. The figure groaned in pain, trying to back away, but an invisible force seemed to hold him back. Then, with a terrifying scream, the figure of the man in black completely vanished. After Silas disappeared, the space returned to silence. Sarah felt a sense of peace spread through her heart. She knew the evil spirit had been defeated. The priest continued to pray for the remaining souls in the cemetery to find peace. Afterward, he advised Sarah to visit her mother's grave often and pray for her. Since that night, Sarah no longer encountered strange phenomena in the cemetery. She believed that her mother and Elizabeth had found rest. She still often visited her mother's grave, bringing bouquets of white chrysanthemums and praying for the departed souls. Sarah's story is a reminder that the spiritual world always exists, and sometimes we need to seek help from people of faith to confront evil forces. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.